Today, I want to share with you my tips and tricks to build an Ender3 machine. So, I decided to buy an extra Ender3 machine. Mine has been heavily modified and I needed another one that was a bit more stock because I have a few more upgrades that I want to test. So, I needed a new machine. And I took advantage of the spring fest or the spring deals that I got on AliExpress. They happened pretty much the same day as Amazon Prime Day. And I got this brand new Ender3, which I assembled, and I want to share with you what is the experience about that. So without further ado, let's jump into the build. So the first thing to do is to assemble the two main vertical shafts, or I don't know what they're called. So the only thing you need to take care of is that there's a couple of holes in one of them, which is to assemble the power supply. So you need to make sure you put that one in the right place. I'm not going to tighten them yet. We first need to make sure everything is more square. So according to them, the second step should be to assemble the screen. I'm just going to jump that one for now. So the next thing we want to do is to assemble the extruder and actually the gantry itself. You've got two extrusions. One goes on the top, it's the shorter one, and the longer one is actually your X-axis gantry. So let's work with this one. So on the side where this one goes, you have the big hole for the head of the screw and then two smaller holes for the two screws that hold this in place. There's no need to over tighten too much, and you see here why I left it loose is that in this way I have some play around this that I can use. And that will come in handy later on, and luckily I can actually tighten these two while this is assembled. So that's what I'm going to do. So the next step is to drive the belt through. This is a very handy tool I always have with me. So before we mount this one, I want to put the screw in and the Z motor. The reason why I want to do this is because the lead screw, you don't want to over constrain the whole assembly, so you need to make sure that the lead screw is free to run regardless of the position of the rest. So to mount the motor, what I prefer to do, because the problem with the motor is that this one is not very square. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that the motor is square before you tighten it. So you want it to rest on the extrusion. So I put a piece of paper. I have this Creality invitation, and it's perfect for this. So I want to make sure that the motor rests on the extrusion. So now I'm going to push the motor against the paper, and we will see if we have succeeded. So the other thing I'm going to do is to loosen these two screws. We're going to tighten that later. And that's again because we don't want to over constrain the thing. By the way, there is way too much grease on this one. So you might want to loosen the coupling also on the motor side In my case, it looks a bit too tight. You might want to tighten the coupling first on the screw. So this is a pretty delicate phase in the assembly, and you want to make sure you make this one right. So my suggestion is loosen all screws, take your time to work it until it fits. So now I have the motor tightened to the screw, and you see everything is pretty loose. So let's use our piece of paper again. And the reason why I'm putting here a piece of paper is just because I don't want to have the motor resting straight on the extrusion. But still I want something flat and even so that it is parallel to the extrusion. So let me tighten the 4 screws on the bottom. So as you've seen, I've put the gantry all the way up because what I want to do is to make a square out of the whole thing. You see, this is how it should be running. So very smoothly up and down. Not that I'm following these instructions, but that's useful for the screws, which screws I need. So what I want to do now, what you should be doing now, I don't have a vernier gauge with me, but what you could be doing is checking the height of this towards this, and then you can adjust slightly the screws in here to make it square. So my suggestion is to run it up and down a few times just to make sure you don't feel any seizings or any part of it that is hard. And then when you are done, you can retighten these 2 screws, just gently. No need to make them very tight. Remember that the insert is made of brass. And as much as you might be tempted to use the ball end of an Allen key, this doesn't have a ball end, but just don't. These screws strip very easy. So this is designed to have a notch down here that sits somewhere. I think it has to sit on top of the bottom extrusion and just operate like that. So I have actually collapsed the bed down, so I tightened it all the way down. So the springs are fully tightened, and there's still probably a good centimeter between the bed, but I also am missing the build surface. So I'm going to set it to fine tune this later, but I think overall, no big deal with this one. So looks pretty okay. The only thing I'm not going to keep stock on this machine for sure is the extruder. This extruder is junk. Breaks too easy, so I'm going to ditch it, and I'm going to recover the previous extruder I had. Video link in the video description, because I'm using a direct drive on the other machine. Wow, I haven't seen the original screen on Ender3 in quite a while. And there's still no cover on the bottom. Okay, so let's give a look to this Chinese power supply, 360 watt, 25 volts. One thing to pay attention to is the voltage. This is set to 230, which is the safe option. If you live in the US where you have 115 or 110, if you set it to 115 and you power up at 220, it will burn. So just double check that, but if they default it to 230, it's the good choice. So it looks like they finally got some original XT60. Not sure. I mean, they are marked as original. So the last thing I have to do is to fix this wobble. So you can see that. It's one of the eccentric nuts that is loose. It's actually an hexagon, so they call it a nut, but it's not really a nut. It is a spacer. So that's why you get this wrench. So you just have to work it until the wheels grip enough and remove this wobble. So you don't want to make it too tight. You want to make it so that if you really push, it will spin the wheel. But that will require some force. No wobble anymore. And actually the final thing I could do is see if it rocks. There is a bit of rocking, so to remove that rocking you can undo the frame. So the frame is held in place with 2 screws on each side. So if you loosen those screws and make sure you're sitting on a flat surface, and then you just push it so that it will even out, and then you tighten it up again. And now the rocking is gone. And that's it. I would say that's it for the assembly. So I'm going to fire it up and see if it prints nicely. And but before doing that, I'm going to replace the extruder itself, and that's it for the assembly of the Ender3. I hope you enjoyed a few tips and tricks I shared. So to wrap it up, I can say that building an Ender3 machine is a quite straightforward process. It takes around 1 hour, more or less. This is what took me, and on top of this, of course, I wasn't following strictly the instructions, and I was also filming, so I would say 1 hour is a fair estimation of the time it takes, and it gives you a bit of insights on how the machine operates and how it's being designed. There are a few key points that you need to take care of, and one mostly is the assembly of the lead screw and in general of the Gantry system. I can also say I'm positively impressed by some of the additions to the machine. So for example, the cabling has been improved. Now there's end ties or end ribbons at the end of these cable sheets, and the overall build looks pretty good, I would say. There is a few things that I don't particularly appreciate. The press fit gear on the extruder mainly, because that makes it difficult to make an upgrade, and also in general the press fit gear. I think it's a very tiny saving, and I would actually prefer to have non-press fit, so the ones with the grub screw. But in case you want to install dampers on this machine and you don't know how to do it, there's a link in the description, and I'm going through it and with my own design. So that's pretty much it for today. I hope you enjoy what you see. If you want to stay in touch with me, just hit the subscribe button, ring the bell next to it, and you will get notification of my upcoming videos. And that's it for today. Until next time.